it's my great pleasure to introduce my lovely husband, Stephen Galbraith, who was once employed by the Kazakhstani Secret Service. It's true. Okay, he's not allowed to tell you. And that's why I can't remember whether I knew at the time or whether I didn't find out until afterwards. Because he's actually very good at keeping secrets. Okay, so when I asked him what he would like to come back as, he had two answers, a rather flippant one, which is kind of funny, which is he'd like to come back as a fly on the wall. But his much more serious one was that he'd like to come back as John Lee Hooker. And he says, having lived a life of white middle-class privilege, since reincarnation is all about karma, it's only fitting that he should come back to life of racism and poverty, but with a great voice. Stephen Galbraith.
Well, thanks very much, and I'm glad to see so many of you here, and I'm slightly insecure about following the last talk. I don't think I quite have the mana of Nairi, but we'll see what we can do. So I'm a mathematician. I work here at the University of Auckland, and I spend most of my time teaching mathematics and so forth. And so this is a topic that somehow is a sort of I've come across in my life. Now, don't panic. People often panic about mathematics. I have a lot of people come to me at parties, tell me they hated mathematics or they're terrible at mathematics. This is not a talk about mathematics, really. This is a talk about pseudoscience and about the people who do pseudoscience. I never met Martin Gardner, but he was a very interesting chap, American. He wasn't a mathematician as such. He was a journalist, and he wrote a lot about mathematics, but he was also a magician, and he did a lot of magic tricks and mathematical magic tricks. And he was also a skeptic, a sort of pioneering skeptic, and a founder of the thing I can never remember that turned into the Center for Inquiry. And some of you in your packs have puzzles related to Martin Gardner. Right, there's two types of pseudoscience. There's deliberate and unintentional. So most of the stuff we deal with is deliberate pseudoscience. It's a scam, and someone's muddying it up with scientific language. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about innocent people who think they're doing science, but they're not. So these are the people I want to talk about. Right, what is mathematics anyway? Mathematics is very hard to define. Wikipedia does a terrible job. My favorite definition of mathematics is by Bill Thurston. Bill Thurston was a towering figure in mathematics. He died a few years ago. He had the following definition of mathematics, which the best thing about this is if you're a mathematician, you love this definition because it's somehow recursive. It still doesn't actually tell you what mathematics is. But it's a little bit like science. What is science? Right? A lot of our enemies try and put science in a box and say, you know, the thing I'm doing is outside science. You can't study what I'm doing because my thing's outside science. And you know, we know that science is a tool, is a method, and it doesn't really have a well-defined boundary. And mathematics also is a bit more well-defined, but it also is hard to put in a box. And that's a sign of its power, right? You know, powerful things can't be contained very well. But there are some characteristic features of mathematics. It has some kind of notion of proof. We actually have the extraordinary evidence for our extraordinary claims. We have a proof that can be followed and covers all possible cases. You know, why do people become mathematicians? I think it's this love of the black and white of the world, right? The world is not black and white. The world is complicated. People can disagree. You know, it's a great refuge to go and study mathematics when you're young, to get away from the complexities of life and be some geeky kid and go to a world where everything is black and white. It's so nice I've never left. And mathematical theorems are true. They're not going to change. It's not like physics even. I mean, people physicists think they're geeky and escaping from the world, but physics is always being upgraded, and things are true for a while, and then, oh, it turns out it was a little bit more complicated and has to be revised, whereas Euclid is still true after 2,000 years. And mathematics also is really nice. It can analyze itself. So we know that there are things in mathematics that are impossible. I'll come back to that. By the way, you can interrupt as well if you wish to, and you won't be recorded if you interrupt. After last night's quiz, it was raised, should it be called math or maths? And so I actually did some research into this. No comment. So the Greek is no help, and the Latin is no help because they don't have an S on the end. It's a collective noun like physics or statistics or athletics. So it's a single word that means a multitude of things. I say my favorite subject is mathematics, like my favorite food is apples or something. And math should be an abbreviation, right? So it should be you abbreviate gymnastics to gym. So I guess you should abbreviate mathematics to math. So that's certainly a valid interpretation.
Short for gymnasium.
Ah, maybe, okay. But there's a... But anyway, so before you think I'm turning into an American, and I think it's okay, there seems to be a plausible argument that you should call it math. But if so, exactly. But if so, you should now refer to stat for the rest of your life. And you should say, I was reading this paper and the stat was wrong. And when Americans start saying that, then we will say math. I'm a number theorist. So mathematics is a collective noun. There's lots of subjects within mathematics. There's really only one way of thinking. There's only one logic. But there's lots of branches of mathematics. My branch of mathematics is number theory. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. And it's got lots of interesting questions. You don't need to understand any of this, but lots of interesting questions about prime numbers and so forth. Great thing about number theory is you can explain what some of these problems are to children and to people who are interested in science. So for example, most people can remember what a prime is, and most people can understand the statement of Goldbach's conjecture that every even number is a sum of two primes. So, I don't know, 18 should be, oh God, what did I choose? Thank you, 11 plus 7. Or twin primes. There are infinitely many primes p such that p plus 2 is also a prime, like 11 and 13. The bad news is everyone can understand these problems, and occasionally people think they can solve them. And because the problem, because we can all understand the statement of this question, there's no entry barrier. There's no entry barrier to these questions. Children can understand them. So, why should there be an entry barrier to solving them? So, number theory is a very attractive area for amateur mathematicians because the problems themselves can be expressed very simply. So amateur mathematicians I like number theory too. I have no excuse for that, but amateur mathematicians also like number theory. Mathematics is full of eccentrics. Oh my goodness. There are some very funny eccentric mathematicians. I mean, Archimedes, of course, jumped out of the bath. Well, we don't know if any of this stuff is true, right? But, you know, the story goes he jumped out of the bath and ran naked down the streets yelling, Eureka. Pythagoras, the story goes, he was so in love with the integers, when someone proved to him that the square root of 2 was irrational, he had him thrown overboard off the ship to drown because he didn't like someone telling him that square root of 2 was irrational. Isaac Newton, of course, believed in... what was it he believed in? Alchemy, yeah, he was an alchemist. Alexander Grothendieck died recently, died a couple of months ago. One of the great mathematicians of the 20th century. Stark raving bonkers, as far as I can tell, about lots of stuff. Ran off and lived in the mountains in southern France.
Probably just get ADHD or Asperger's.
Well, okay, sorry, I'm not being inclusive. Sorry, I'm in danger of behaving inappropriately. These people have special needs, and we should be sensitive to their requirements. Okay, so maybe I'm taking cheap shots. Nash, of course, he was in the film. He wasn't in the film. The film *Beautiful Mind* was about John Nash, an extraordinary guy. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics, but he was really a mathematician. Louis de Brange is still going strong. Very interesting character. Look him up on Wikipedia. Stephen Wolfram is the guy behind Mathematica. Some of you will know Mathematica, a computer program, fantastic computer program. And Stephen Wolfram's a very smart guy, and he believes that cellular automata can explain everything. And he wrote a huge, fat book called The New Kind of Science, which is not at all an arrogant thing to say, and where he explains that all of science can be explained with cellular automata. And Grigori Perelman's a recent one. He proved the Poincare conjecture, which is something about geometry, and then there was a $1 million prize associated with that. And he turned down the prize, and he went into hiding, and he wouldn't talk to journalists, and no one knows what he's doing. And this is relatively recently. This is like 10 years ago. So, you know, we're used to dealing with interesting people. Now, pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is not new. So Augustus de Morgan, first president of the London Mathematical Society, he's a distinguished mathematician, and he wrote a book. I'm not sure when he wrote the book, but it's somewhere between 1806 and 1871. He wrote a book called The Budget of Paradoxes. Oh, and I forgot my props. Where's my... Ah, yeah, that's it. I did have more of his quote somewhere. In every age of the world, there is an established system that's opposed from time to time by reformers. He goes on about talking about these dissidents. He talks about the isolated character of dissidents. So he's talking about special people that somehow can change the world, and that every now and then someone important comes along and changes the world. And he calls these people paradoxers. A paradoxer is someone who's got a different point of view to everyone else. Someone who thinks, you know, it's always been done this way, but maybe it's actually something different. So he wants to use this word paradoxer. He calls them a paradoxer and his system of paradox. The paradox is something apart from general opinion. So this is something we can be, I think, sympathetic to some of the time. We can admire a lot of paradoxes. You know, Einstein was a paradoxer. So he's celebrating paradoxes. But then the manner in which a paradoxer will show himself or herself as to sense or nonsense will depend not on what he maintains. It doesn't matter how outrageous his claim is, but whether he's made sufficient knowledge of what has been done by others, especially to the mode of doing it. So you can have crazy ideas in science, but you should understand how science works before you have crazy ideas in science. This is what he's saying back in the 1860s or 1870s. So a paradoxer, you could say, is some kind of maverick or free thinker. And a crank, you could say, is a paradoxer who's wrong. But is unaware of it. This is the important point. I'm not talking about charlatans, I'm not talking about scam artists, I'm talking about people who believe themselves, honestly believe that they've got the answer to everything, but they are actually wrong because they somehow don't know the right way to do things. Richard Posner, this comes from a lawsuit in the US. To call a person a crank is to say because of some quirk of temperament, he's wasting his time pursuing a line of thought without merit. Now, this could appear, again, I've got to be very sensitive to the appropriateness. I'm calling all these people male, but I must say the evidence is overwhelmingly that almost all these people are male, as the crazy ones. Okay. This is a book I enjoy very much. It's by a fellow called Underwood Dudley. It's called Mathematical Cranks. Underwood Dudley was a mathematician. He's probably still alive for all I know. He wrote that. I think it's from the 80s. 1992. And he's written a lot of books about mathematical cranks. In particular, these ones, the trisectors numerology. Now, this is interesting, this trisectors. And going back to De Morgan wrote a lot about trisectors, circle squarers, and so forth. What's this about? These are geometric problems. The ancient Greeks did a lot of plane geometry, lines, circles, angles, triangles, that kind of stuff you're taught at school sometimes. And they were interested in constructing geometric shapes using some kind of process. And at some point they found they could do lots of cool things, but there were certain problems they somehow couldn't solve. One of them was trisecting an angle. You have two lines meeting, that forms an angle between them, and you wanted to find a line that made a new angle that was 1/3 of the other angle. And for certain angles they could do it, but they couldn't come up with a general procedure, what we would call an algorithm, within their system of rules that would do this. So for thousands of years, this was an unsolved problem. How do you trisect the angle in general? How do you get an algorithm within a certain computational model to do this? If you increase the model, once protractors are invented, it becomes trivial. But where they want to do this without protractors, we're just using their straight edges and things. The great thing is, in mathematics, it has the tools to analyze itself. So Évariste Galois, another famous mathematician who died at the age of 21 in a duel over politics, he found the tools that proved it's impossible to trisect the angle. It's impossible. This was understood in 1805 or something. It's impossible to trisect the angle. It's impossible to square the circle, which is given a circle, to build a square of the same area. It's possible to double the cube. Given a cube, you can't find another cube that's twice the volume. These three things have been proven mathematically to be impossible to do within the Greek rules of geometry. And yet, hundreds of people will write in to mathematicians explaining their solution to trisecting the angle, their solution to squaring the circle, even though it's been proven to be impossible. So this is a very strange thing. So that's why he's written a book about trisectors. These are people who, you know, and they somehow know, even though it's been proven. And you see, it's an interesting thing. It's a kind of libertarian thing. Don't tell me it's impossible. You say it's impossible. Let me try. It's proven to be impossible. I mean, don't tell me what I can do. So this is what he writes about. He writes a lot about these people. People who think pi is a different number. You do not know how many people have thought that pi was a different number. It's explained in these books. And he writes, he's thought about these people a lot. A lot of these people are amateurs. They like to work on mathematical problems. They aren't nuts. They've just got a blind spot in one direction. The reason why these have failed is, of course, I know lots of perfectly legitimate mathematicians who are annoying. Now, serious time. Who are these people? How do people become cranks? Who are these people? Well, they're males getting on a bit. They're interested in science. Listen to lots of podcasts. Think they're smarter than most other people. You know, think that they'd like to have a go at this. This is an at-risk group. So in the rest of my talk, I want to give you some pointers on your journey.
And then your email address.
Well, this is you keep jumping my punchlines, Nathan. What should a paradoxer do? Now, if you're a mathematical paradoxer, that means you should consult a mathematician. So I actually am very happy that people, amateur mathematicians, contact me. Because that's what they should do, right? I mean, if someone is an anti-vaccine nut, right, they should contact Susie, right? Because she can debunk it faster and better than any of the rest of us can. If you're a climate crank, you should talk to someone who really knows about climate science, because they have the tools to do it, right? It's no point talking to the other guys in the pub who are not experts, because they're not going to be able to get to the rubber. I can get to the bottom of these things very quickly. So it's perfectly appropriate that someone who's a mathematician, who's interested in mathematics, should talk to me. Now, why do I reply? I reply to these people because I'm happy that people like mathematics, right? I mean, I want people to like mathematics. I want people to still encourage their children and their friends' children that going to university and studying mathematics is a good thing, because I will stay employed. I consider, well, I think who else would do it anyway? Part of my duty as a professional mathematician. And last one, interesting. I might learn something, not about mathematics, but about skepticism or about how people think or about psychology. It's fascinating communicating with these people. I did actually learn some mathematics from one as well. Now, the problem is when a crank contacts an expert, they will not get a reply. Even Underwood Dudley, the most famous enthusiast for this stuff, will tell you it is almost always a mistake to correspond with these people. Some of us are so filled with the urge to educate that we try to reason with the trisector. It's almost always futile. And so when you reach this point and you're sending your email to some local mathematician, you have to be aware that most of them will delete your email instantly. This is not because we're evil, because we're busy. The third thing, this is really true. This is really true. I was told this earlier this year by someone who was visiting Auckland. I reject all these papers immediately because either they're wrong or they deserve to be published in a better journal. And you really get somehow, when you're getting inducted in some sense into mathematics, you're sort of, there's a clear kind of signal that you shouldn't waste time talking to these people. They're just a waste of your time. So here's real case studies. I have an inquiry about whether you review a paper. I'm an amateur mathematician. The problem I'm trying to solve is notorious for attracting failed attempts. The consequences of getting my paper reviewed could not be less favorable. Now, this is a good thing, right? This person's saying, look, I know that this is, I'm completely out of the blue. I know no one's going to take me seriously. They're showing some kind of metacognition of the situation they're in. This is someone that I can reply to. Because they're not saying, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. You need to read my proof. They're saying, everyone's going to think I'm crazy, so please will you at least give me some time. This is the way to get an expert to listen to you. This worked. This is an actual email I got. Do not compare yourself to Galileo or Einstein, or if you're a mathematician, Ramanujan. That's other people's job to compare you to Einstein or Galileo. Einstein didn't say he was the new Galileo. Other people said that. Right. Nothing worse. Just don't mention Galileo or Einstein anywhere in your emails, on your webpage. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Right. Learn the language. It's an interesting thing. This is a real quote as well. Apologies, my paper is painful to read. Though I must say I know plenty of professional mathematicians that would say similar things. But yeah, this is an interesting thing. If you're enthusiastic about mathematics, you've been thinking about it for years, you've been working on it, and you're trying to communicate. I mean, there's the urge to communicate, right? You think you've done something, you want to be recognized. That's the point, right? It's the point of all these people. They want to be recognized. They want to be standing up in front of the room with people clapping at them saying, yes, you did it. That's what they want, right? So why not learn how to do it? There's a guy I'm in contact with here in Auckland even. And he comes and sees me about every year. And I always tell him the same thing, which is like, well, why don't you just learn some mathematics? He comes to me, he talks to me about the stuff. And I say, well, why don't you just learn it? I mean, one time I said to him, why don't you stop playing and do it seriously then? Why don't you enroll at university? I mean, if you like it so much, why don't you try? But there's something, you won't do it.
So these cranks, they're just employing them in any papers in math at all. They just...
Oh, some of them have done engineering. I mean, these are smart people. These are the people in the room. It's the people in the room. They've got an engineering degree. They've worked in IT for decades. Smart people, intelligent people, interested, read a lot. Yeah, I mean, these are not crazy people, right? They've got a blind spot in one direction, maybe. They're optimistic. I mean, they're nice. I mean, they're perfectly likable, but they're honestly, they're the people in the room. They're nice people, right? They're crazy. They're not. Criticism. The expert will, if you're lucky enough to get a reply, will find a fault in your argument somewhere, or something which is unclear, or something which needs great improvement. Please try and understand what they've said before you send your angry email. Here's a good one. This is a nice one I got a couple of years ago. I also work in cryptography. I work in cryptography and algorithms and stuff, and so I'm also interested in things like factoring and things like this. So here's a good one. I got something. I got this email, wrote a little note, sent me this thing. Could please have a quick look. Give me any literature hints. Again, nice email. You're going to reply to this person. They're not saying, I'm the new Galileo. They're saying, oh, I've got some ideas, but I don't know, maybe I've missed something. Tell me about the literature. I was able to point something out. You get a nice reply. You got a gracious reply. Thanks for the help. I didn't know this. That's fine. Good. Everyone's happy. He's happy. I'm happy. Everyone's happy. Didn't take me long. It's good, right? He took the credit. He understood my point. Went away. Understood my point. Got it. Everyone's happy. Not everyone stays happy. Sometimes people get very angry. It will be disappointing interacting with someone like me. My students feel the same way. I get a lot of complaints. Why did I get nothing on the assignment? I mean, it's amazing. I found this year I was teaching this big course, and we put the solutions to this. We'd have an assignment, and you put the solutions to the assignment online, and the students come to you and they say, oh, I got 0, and I looked at the solution, and my answer's the same. No, it's not the same. But no, I'm used to this. I mean, people get, they feel let down. But please don't tell me to burn everything you've ever sent me, or, it's gruff. I've decided I don't want to continue with this review, So there will be anger, but I don't want to hear about it. Be gracious in defeat. Thanks for explaining. After many emails. Thanks for, I understand your argument now. My wish for something to be true undermined my ability to think clearly about it. It makes the proof of what I was claiming uncertain, to say the same at the least, or as I would say, completely false. But the person assures me they haven't given up and still working on it. I've still got 15 minutes, haven't I? Yeah, okay, cool. I don't have much more to say, actually. Can cranks be cured? This is the question. I don't think so. My sense is that people bounce back. And I think this is I mean, so I think it's an interesting cognitive thing, right? You get your heart set on, I mean, I think this happens to all of us. I mean, I'm an average mathematician, right? And I've written some papers, and people seem to think they're okay. But, I haven't won $1 million, and it's pretty clear by now I'm not going to win $1 million. And I was never really thought I was going to win $1 million. But, you have an idea. You have an idea of what you're going to achieve in your life, right? And, I mean, I'm not too upset about it. But it's very easy to have a really high dream. I will be like Einstein or something. And, if it starts to not happen, I guess it's difficult to figure out what you're going to do about that. And so one thing is you sort of deny all the evidence that suggests that you're not going to be Einstein, and you still believe you're going to be Einstein, right? Now, most of us actually adjust our expectations in life. But I think for some people, they think I am going to be, I'm going to be someone that turns science around. And no matter how much evidence to the contrary comes in, that dream somehow lives. I'm sure Steve Novella can explain this. But so my argument, my feeling is from my interactions is that you can't cure this kind of thing. But perhaps, this is my hope, early intervention can have some preventative effect. And so I'm very happy if people keep emailing me their proofs at an early stage, and I can try and somehow get them to possibly learn some mathematics and learn some communication stuff. Okay, I do have one more anecdote. This was here for space filling, so I'll fill the space. Will one day one of these people be true? Will one day one of these people actually prove the Riemann hypothesis? Most professional mathematicians would say this clearly is never going to happen. There's no point. They are all wrong. It's never going to happen that an amateur is ever going to do anything interesting. As far as I'm aware, there is one counterexample. Okay, so there's hundreds, if not thousands, of amateurs that think they can do it, but there was once an amateur who really did do something. His name was Kurt Heegner, and he was a German high school. I mean, he had a mathematics degree. He was a German high school teacher in the higher quality of German high schools, which are called gymnasiums, actually, which comes back to my previous point. Anyway, he was an educated fellow, and there was a very famous problem in mathematics called the class number 1 problem. Who knows what that is? And he announced a proof of it in 1952. And everyone thought, well, it's just some guy, he's just a school teacher, can't possibly write, can't make any sense of it, gave it the flick. Harold Stark and some guy called Baker, forgotten his first name, they proved it independently. Stark got a big prize. Baker got a Fields Medal, which is the big prize in mathematics, like the Nobel Prize, Fields Medal. So Baker was a Fields Medalist for that and other things he'd done. So they got a lot of acclaim for proving, it was a big deal when this class number 1 proof got proved. Heegner, well, he was already forgotten by this point. Now, it's interesting. My PhD supervisor actually went back one day because he was interested in this stuff and somehow got to the bottom of it and recognized that Heegner's proof was actually correct. And this is a quote from my PhD supervisor. Heegner's paper was written in an amateurish and rather mystical style. It was not surprising that at the time no one tried very hard to understand it. So, but Birch went away and filled it. I mean, there were gaps in some sense. But he filled in these gaps and realized that Heegner's argument was a perfectly valid argument. So here you go. This teacher, he really had come up with essentially the framework for the proof. Yeah, well, there you go. So, there you go. Now, Alf van der Poorten, a Australian, well, he was Dutch, but he lived in Australia his whole life. Very interesting character. He wrote about this in one of his books. Fortunately, this story is not well known. Otherwise, it would feed the persecution complexes of amateurs. So I really shouldn't be showing this. And because you're all at risk. Is this a disgraceful scale? So here's the question: Is this an outrage? Should we be absolutely, filled with introspection because somehow one amateur was not recognised? No, he says. No, it's not a scandal. If the amateur had tried harder, talked to a few more experts, tried to get a bit more dialogue going with existing mathematicians, worked on it a bit, they would have been recognised, right? We're not evil. It's not some conspiracy keeping people out. I was never inducted into some conspiracy of mathematicians. It's exactly what I would say. How can you see through me so easily? So, the amateurs, an amateur should try. Yeah, so if in consequence great contributions are neglected, that's a misfortune. It's very sad for that person. It's temporarily sad for mathematics, except eventually someone else does it. Nothing ever, it always grows. But it's not a scandal. Now, the interesting thing is it would actually be the flip side, right? If someone great somehow gets some paper published even though it's crap. That couldn't possibly happen. So, here's my conclusion, rather early, sorry about that. There are a lot of paradoxes around. There are a lot of people, a lot of free thinkers, a lot of people with different ideas. That's a good thing. But if you really think you know something that other people don't, you should test that by talking to the experts who are going to be in a better position to say, yes, but, than just the guy in the pub. When you do that, most professionals will not respond. That's just because they're busy. So I actually would like to encourage more professionals to interact with paradoxes because it somehow should be part of their job, even though they're busy. Up to a point, they can stop anytime they like. And really the mark of it is whether the paradoxer has gone away and learnt enough about the subject and what the methods of the subject are, and whether they're willing to listen to criticism. And if we can't cure them, even in mathematics, even in nice little mathematics, where we have a rigorous notion of proof and absolutely rigorous laws and a very precise language for doing things, if we can't cure them in mathematics, then I'm afraid there's no way we're going to cure them in the whole of pseudoscience. All right, that's all. Thanks.